Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and this is episode 10 of Women of Harry Potter. Today we are discussing everyone's favourite French girl, Fleur Delacour. Skip this video if you haven't read Harry Potter and don't want any spoilers because this will be full of them. I want to start by sharing with you one of my favourite scenes with Fleur. This is the one scene that, without fail, makes me cry every single time I read it. And because I tear up every time I read this scene, I asked my friend Ellie to read it out for you. This is from Harry Potter and the Halfblood Prince, and it's right at the end, after Dumbledore's death, when everyone is in the hospital wing. Mrs. Weasley is tending to her son Bill, who got badly injured in the fight after he was bitten by a werewolf. And here it is.
Of course it doesn't matter how he looks. It's not really important, but he was a very handsome little boy, always very handsome, and he was going to be married. And what do you mean by that? Said Fleur, suddenly and loudly. What do you mean he was going to be married? Miss Weasley raised her tear-stained face, looking startled. Well, only that... You think Bill will not wish to marry me any more? Demanded Fleur. You think, because these bites, he will not love me? No, that's not what Because he will, said Fleur, drawing herself up to her full height and throwing back her long mane of silver hair. It would take more than a werewolf to stop Bill loving me. Well, yes, I'm sure, said Miss Weasley. But I thought perhaps, given how he... You thought I would not wish to marry him? Or perhaps you hoped? Said Fleur, her nostrils flaring. What do I care how he looks? I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think. All these scars show is that my husband is brave, and I shall do that, she added fiercely, pushing Miss Weasley aside and snatching the ointment from her. Miss Weasley fell back against her husband and watched Fleur mopping up Bill's wounds with a most curious expression upon her face. Nobody said anything. Harry did not dare move. Like everybody else, he was waiting for the explosion. Our great-aunt Muriel, said Miss Weasley, after a long pause, has a very beautiful tiara, goblin-made, which I'm sure I could persuade her to lend you for the wedding. She is very fond of Bill, you know, and it would look lovely with your hair. Thank you, said Fleur stiffly. I am sure that would be lovely. And then, Harry did not quite see how it happened, both women were crying and hugging each other. Completely bewildered, wondering whether the world had gone mad, he turned around. Ron looked as stunned as Harry felt, and Ginny and Hermione were exchanging startled looks.
Isn't this absolutely beautiful? I love that moment when both Fleur and Mrs. Weasley realise that they both love Bill and that the rivalry that's been going on between them was silly and unnecessary. Mrs. Weasley realises in that moment that Fleur is, unlike what she had thought of her, more than just a pretty face, and that she is serious in her relationship with Bill. Up until this point in the book, though, Fleur has mostly encountered hostile reactions from the other female characters in the book. She is mostly described by her appearance every time she is described at all in the books, by her silvery hair and her beautiful face, and by the effect that has on the male characters. I'm sure we all remember the way that Ron and Harry sometimes turn into blubbering idiots every time they see her. Now, this depiction of female beauty as being so detrimental to the ability for rational thought in men is very problematic and indicative of rape culture, and I don't really want to talk about that here. I feel like this discussion has already been had. But instead I want to focus on the relationship Fleur has with other women and also dive into the reasons why the narrative shows her as being perceived in the way that she is. I want to explain why I think that the narrative does her a disservice. We first meet Fleur in the Goblet of Fire, where she is chosen as one of the 4 Triwizard champions. The story makes it very clear that the chosen champions are special, that they are incredibly skilled and very brave. However, if we hadn't been told that in every chapter in the Goblet of Fire, we wouldn't no, it would be very hard to guess that Fleur had any such skills based on the way that she is described to us in the book. From her interactions and the scenes with her, we get the idea of a very arrogant, very vain girl with zero skills and no control over her emotions when it matters. She comes last in every task of the Triwizard Tournament, and as a reader I wondered where that heroism, that skill and that daring was that was so readily shown in the other three champions. It's no coincidence that she is the only female contestant in the tournament. Fleur is described as the epitome of femininity, and as such she is not allowed to have any qualities that could in any way be considered masculine, such as daring, strength, heroism and rationality, which is a shame. We know that she has to have those qualities because otherwise the Goblet of Fire wouldn't have chosen her as a champion. But because her function in this story is to make a point about a certain type of femininity, she's not allowed to actually showcase that traditionally unfeminine side of her. The next time we see Fleur is in the Halfblood Prince, where she makes her return as the fiancée of Bill Weasley. She spends the summer in the Burrow, and that's where we meet her. Suddenly, she is every woman's enemy. Ginny, Hermione and Mrs. Weasley are all quite hostile towards her, something that even Harry notices. Even Harry. Fleur is all excited about the upcoming wedding and gets stuck into the planning with a lot more enthusiasm than she ever showed for the Triwizard Tournament tasks, and a lot more enthusiasm, I should add, than Bill Weasley shows, who's almost entirely absent in these scenes. So why are the women of the Burrow so mean to her? Is it just because she gets a little too much into the table decorations? Well, the narrative wants to make us believe that Mrs. Weasley, Hermione Granger and Ginny Weasley don't like Fleur because she is beautiful and they are jealous. Which sucks. Because that trope of women being jealous of more attractive women around them is just not true. And it doesn't make sense for three characters who we have learned to admire for their emotional strength would feel that way and act that way. It's a very cheap way of adding tension to the story, and this artificial tension would not have been necessary if Fleur had been given more of a personality in the Goblet of Fire. Because of the way that things are now at the beginning of the Half-Blood Prince, it just makes the other women look a bit petty. Now, I can understand why Mrs. Weasley would have objections to Fleur. She is a mother who is about to, quote-unquote, lose a son to marriage for the first time, her eldest son. It makes sense for her to have some objections to the bride, so I concede that that tension is believable to me. But mainly, Mrs. Weasley, as well as Ginny and Hermione, seem to resent Fleur for being arrogant and beautiful. Why is Fleur arrogant? Because she is beautiful. It's a very flatly written arrogance. Her haughtiness seems to be entirely confined to being confident about her looks, really, which, funnily enough, is portrayed as a bad character trait in her, but as a good character trait in Ginny Weasley, who's also confident in her looks. Like I said, I think the tension between Mrs. Weasley and Fleur is fairly well done, which is exactly why I break down in tears every time I get to that bit at the end of the Half-Blood Prince, when Mrs. Weasley offers Fleur the tiara, and by doing that she shows her future daughter-in-law that she values her as part of the family. It also shows Fleur as a confident and mature woman rather than a petty and vain Queen Bee type character. I really wish we'd seen more of that Fleur. The next time we encounter her is in the Deathly Hallows, where she is part of the Seven Potters rescue operation. And this is the only time that we see her as an active member of the resistance against Voldemort. Then there's her own wedding, where she feels weirdly absent, but that also makes sense because that scene really is about all the other things going on at the wedding. Harry and his friends run off after the wedding is raided by Death Eaters, and then we don't see anything of Fleur until Harry, Ron and Hermione go to stay with her and Bill at Shell Cottage towards the end of the book. Somehow, marriage seems to have turned Fleur into Mrs. Weasley. She is suddenly concerned about domestic tasks and nothing else. She doesn't get a say when matters of importance are being discussed, and she is overly concerned for the pampering and well-being of Harry, trying to keep him from danger, even though she too is part of that resistance and she knows how important his work is. Fleur has somehow turned into an apron-wearing 1950s housewife. And I really don't know what to make of this strange development in her character. I don't mind the depiction of housewives and stay-at-home mothers, and I think Mrs. Weasley is a beautiful example of the importance of domestic and emotional labour that women do in our society. But it's just not like Fleur. It just clashes with how she's been presented to us so far, and I don't buy it. I think this is a weak ending for a character who showed so much promise in her development. Rowling could have done so much more with the arrogant, mean girl archetype that Fleur started out as. And it is a shame that she gets such an underwhelming end to her character arc. So, what do you think? Does Fleur's development through the second half of Harry Potter make sense to you? Do you think her character could have been taken in a different direction? Do you agree with me that Fleur suffers from a deep, ingrained misogyny that tells us that we need to hate beautiful and feminine women who are proud of their beauty and femininity? Let me know your thoughts. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.